I'm Renee Deehan from InsideTracker, and I am here. It is my great pleasure to have Chris Mohr here from Gainful. Chris Mohr has a PhD in exercise physiology and is also a registered dietitian. Gainful and InsideTracker, we have a ton in common in terms of our general philosophy about how to approach health and wellness, and especially with a solid personalized lens to it all. So thank you so much. We'll be partnering up with Gainful, and we are going to do a giveaway, and there may be some other surprises in there, so stay tuned. So thank you so much for being with us here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about Gainful?
Yeah, absolutely. So Gainful is a supplement company that was initially started to really bring individualization to supplements. And I know growing up for me, like interested in supplements, taking supplements, you always had to buy the 5-pound container of protein, for example, that was chocolate or vanilla was pretty much the option. Well, Gainful kind of had the idea of individualization. So you have individual flavor packets. And then in addition to that, above and beyond just flavoring protein, there are individual products like creatine you can add and other ingredients that you can add for boosts to your particular proteins. You're not stuck with a gigantic serving that you're have to use for the next 10 years.
Yeah. No, I love the different flavor packet aspect
Absolutely.
of it. And I know we were just talking about this. It's also good for baking and things like that.
Right.
So, but and I know that Gainful is very committed to personalization. So how does that work? And I know I've tried the Gainful product, and I know I went online and I had to answer a bunch of questions and in order to get sort of the right formulation for me. So can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, certainly. So when you, as a customer, you go online and you, like you said, you answer a handful of questions about your interest and goals and gender and so on, that can then provide to you a quote personalized formula. So then you're again specific to maybe I want plant protein or dairy protein, whatever the goals are. So there's a handful of questions that everyone goes through, and then you're kind of put into a category of here are some recommendations for you, which is great. And then they also have dietitians on hand who can answer questions, because maybe you need to go above and beyond just the basic questionnaire, and you have some personalized questions, and they're there for you to help you with that as well.
That's really great. So when you are a member of Gainful, you do get access to a dietitian that you can ask questions to.
Correct.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Right.
And there are other products beyond just protein powder, correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Protein's kind of the base. Then, of course,
was that the flagship?
That was the initial flagship,
product?
And then there's the, like I mentioned, the term boosts. So there's things like creatine, fiber. There's a new greens product that's out that can be added as a boost as well. And so there's a variety of other ingredients that can be added to the protein powder or taken in and of themselves. But yeah, no, they have a whole variety of products to really meet the needs of individuals without just thousands of different supplements.
Yeah.
They're research-driven ingredients to either take in and of themselves, add to your protein smoothie, or so on.
Yeah, awesome. And so, in terms of the people that are buying Gainful, like what does their profile typically look like? Who is it for, essentially?
Yeah, it's really, it's for anyone. I think the target market or the prime customer is kind of really that 30 to 50-year-old men and women who are, they're into fitness, into taking care of themselves, and have some general health goals. Maybe not the elite athlete who is looking for very specific needs, but just the person who is just looking for general wellness.
Yeah.
And again, looking to boost their nutrition, boost their overall well-being.
Yeah. Awesome. And actually, it would be great to talk more about what are these ingredients and why they are so beneficial to you? Because, of course, at InsideTracker, we love protein. We actually have done a lot of work recently to try to provide more educational content, especially for women around their protein needs. Especially women who are a little bit older and might be undergoing perimenopause and menopause when you start to reach the age where your muscles start to atrophy. So yeah, talk to us about some of the benefits of just making sure that we're consuming enough protein.
Yeah, I think protein's been on the discussion just lately.
Yes.
Lots of articles and content, which is so important for people, like you mentioned, specifically women as going through that perimenopause, menopause age, and men as we age too.
Absolutely.
As we age, we tend to lose muscle mass. And then women, unfortunately, have that accelerated potential going through that time frame. So, the data shows that we do need, we as a whole, we are, quote, meeting our basic protein needs. However, that doesn't mean it's optimal. Mm-hmm. So research shows we need, as I say, we as Americans, we need more protein than we're consuming. Quantity, also quality, and then also kind of the timing of that protein when you consume it is important. Like you said, as we're losing muscle mass, what can we do to prevent or at least reduce that as we're getting older? Of course, exercise, right? Can't go without that. But making sure we have the right types, quantity, quality of protein is critical as well.
Got it. And actually, let's start talking about the quantity of protein. So where do you land on this one? Yeah. And I know that, everybody has individual needs and different goals, but let's just say that you are not trying to be a physique competitor, but you're just, maybe trying to gain a little muscle or at least maintain the muscle that you have.
Yeah,
what are we looking at? Yeah. Or just say general.
Which is the majority of the population, right? So, of course, you may be familiar with the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance. That's pretty low. That is literally just to say, I'm not deficient.
And what is it? Is that like 1 gram per kg?
So that's actually less than that. It's 0.8 grams per kg, per kilogram of body weight. So again, that's pretty low. Research shows we need more than that. So you can look at a couple different recommendations. So one, they can give it as a percentage of total calories, and the general recommendation is 20 to 35% of your total daily calories. That's not tremendously helpful for a lot of people because they may not even know how many calories they're eating. So, some research shows kind of getting closer to the 1 gram per pound of body weight. Most of the data shows it's in kgs versus pounds, but for those who work in pounds, it's a little bit easier. So kind of doesn't have to be quite that much from what I've seen, but getting closer to that 1 gram per pound of body weight, it would be helpful for most people. Now, that said, that's a pretty good amount of protein.
That's a lot.
And again, it doesn't quite have to be that high, but getting close to that seems to be where the sweet spot is. But, then from a practical standpoint, practicality, what does that look like? If you weigh 150 or 200 pounds, that's a lot of protein. Yeah. How do I make that work? And that's where products like Gainful and the protein powder can come in addition to food, of course. And I know we're going to talk more about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I can honestly say that personally, there's no way that I would be able to come close to that with food.
It's hard.
Not that it's not possible.
Right.
Like, I completely believe that it is possible, but just like in my life, the way that I live it and lead it.
Right, yeah.
Having the ability to very quickly consume 30 grams of protein in a form like that has always actually been a go-to.
Absolutely. Because protein in general is satiating. It fills you up. That makes it challenging.
It really does.
Which is good, and good and bad if you're trying to get a higher dose. So
I know, but in general, I mean,
absolutely.
I actually feel like the more protein I consume, the fewer kind of empty calories I want to consume.
Right.
Or I have the urge to consume.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's been some really powerful data to show just how important that protein, the satiating effect of protein is. So, for example, there was a study done several years ago now by a great protein researcher, Dr. Heather Leidy. They gave people protein in the morning, and it was obese teenage girls in this particular study. And they gave them 3 doses of protein in their breakfast meal. Upwards, the highest dose, I believe, was 35 grams of protein. And what they found was, then they measured calories over the entire day. What they found was in the evening after dinner, they then gave them coolers of just unlimited snacks they can eat, and they saw how much they consumed. Those who had the higher protein in the morning ate about 300 calories less after dinner in that evening snack of the empty. And they showed the choices they made were less of those calories that you mentioned, the kind of empty calories, like the sweets and the cookies and so on. So that protein in the morning, that higher dose, was so powerful, so satiating, that it affected how much they ate in the evening after dinner. So that's and there's been other studies like that as well to show the satiating effects. How big was
that study?
It was a pretty good amount of people, and I forget the number of subjects. But
it wasn't like 6.
It wasn't like 6. No,
Yeah.
it was a good amount of it. It was a well-done study. They had 3 groups. There was a group that had 0 protein in the morning. They had breakfast skippers. Then I think it was 10 or 12 grams of protein, and then 35, I think, was the third group.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I am a consummate night eater, so actually I should probably focus on eating more protein.
Well, that's like, and that's very, very common, right? And protein in particular, the data shows most people eat very little in the morning, a little bit more at lunch, and then most of their protein in the evening, and then whatever might happen after dinner, which usually isn't protein forward. So really the goal is ideally spreading that throughout the day, which is where a supplement can come in handy, because protein is also, you have to really plan ahead to get your protein. Whether it's preparing an animal-based protein, that takes time, or whatever else it might be, the choices you make, you need to do some planning to make sure that you are making those better choices.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And so that's why having a quick option can be really, really wonderful. And yeah, actually you're talking a little bit about protein and meal timing. So what is the ideal regimen if you were trying to hyper-optimize?
Yeah, I would say...
Let's just say we don't have to hyper-optimize at all times here.
Right, no, absolutely. And this, again, I always say what you do most of the time is more important than what you do some of the time.
Yeah.
But if we're looking at the most of the time, ideally, let whatever your total number of protein in grams per day is, let's just use the number 120 just for the sake of this example here, 120 grams for the total for the day. Well, then what I would tell people is look at how many meals you eat a day, and there is no magic number, but again, for the sake of ease, let's say it's 3 meals a day. Well, if we then divide that among those 3 meals and maybe some snacks, that's kind of 30-ish grams of protein per meal, and then some snacks with some protein as well to get to that number, which is a lot.
It's a lot.
Right. So, and that again, that research they've looked at, if you spread your protein out equally throughout the day, actually in 30-gram doses, that was more effective than looking at the timing I talked about earlier, where a low protein intake in the morning, a little bit, but more as we go out throughout the day. So spreading that out equally. But again, look at whatever your total number, estimate what that should be, divide that by how many times you eat a day, and that kind of gives you an idea of how much should you eat per meal.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I have to say, I was saying this earlier, that I have lately been trying very hard to actually consume more protein. I don't crave protein. I don't eat very much meat. So, and I try not to eat too much high-fat dairy, although some of it is great. But I am definitely a late night eater, never hungry in the morning. Breakfast is disgusting. Right? I have all the habits that you're, quote unquote, not supposed to have.
Yeah.
But I did start for the last, I'd say 3 to 4 months, really focusing on trying to eat more protein. Not always consistently, but I was saying I've probably added anywhere between 90 and 150 grams per week more than I was doing before. And I was under consuming. I was probably around 1 mg or 1 gram per kilogram.
Okay.
So that was maybe
end,
a little more than that, maybe 1.1, but like not in the 2.
Up to that 2-ish,
yes, not my body weight, right?
Right.
Like it is really hard for me to get my body weight in protein unless I try very hard. But probably even just adding 90 to 150 grams per week, I noticed it myself. I was like, I feel like I'm swapping a little bit of fat for muscle mass. And my daughter noticed the same thing, actually.
Yeah.
And I was so surprised when she said it to me out of the blue. And I was like, wow, maybe all that protein is actually doing something. And the trainer that I had, I asked him, I was like, why are my muscles getting bigger? And he's like, you don't eat enough protein. He's like, I think that's your problem. He's like, you're working hard enough.
Right.
But I don't know. It was a real revelation for me. And I think even if this was, I need to go get a DEXA scan to actually empirically determine whether a change has happened. But if it had, then even a fairly small amount of addition of protein per week made a difference, which is so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the numbers we're talking about, if you're thinking right now, like I'm not even close to that.
Yeah.
Exactly what you said is important. You don't have to jump to that today, right? But over the course of a week, just adding a little bit more in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because when you work out, which is great, you're doing resistance training, you're breaking down muscle tissue.
Yeah.
Right? So how is it then repairing? You need to give it the fuel to repair and recover.
Yeah.
That's what protein does.
Of course.
And, other nutrition as well, but that's what protein is critical for. And I think what's also important now is to think, okay, so I'm talking about adding more protein. How do I do that? Where do I get protein?
Yeah.
And what are some sources of protein? Because like you said, I don't eat a lot of meat, for example. That's one great source if you do choose it. If you don't, there's other sources as well. But even to kind of put things into perspective, like it is hard to get more protein.
You have to be thoughtful.
You have to be very thoughtful.
Yeah.
Like we said, like an egg is amazing if you choose them. It's only about 6 or 7
still,
grams
yeah,
per egg,
it's
so it's
still
not
not
that
a ton.
much. So it's a great in addition, and that's what's important is we're looking at overall in the diet. We're looking additive sources. So adding an egg, adding some dairy, like you mentioned, sometimes you eat. That's where protein powder comes in because it's a really easy way to add, make a smoothie or extra scoop here and there. If you do eat animal protein, that is a great source. If you don't, there's others. There's tofu and nuts and beans and all these things add up together.
Yeah.
But we have to be aware and we have to be conscious of purposefully adding them.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a really good point. Because even adding probably 4 grams here and there throughout the day can...
It all adds up. It's like exercise. Something's better than nothing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. Well, I think that's what I learned was I was like, all right, I don't have to do this perfectly. I just have to do it a little bit. And
right.
That helps. But then it's motivating when you see some type of progress.
Some type of progress and change. Right. So you're measuring that change.
Like, okay, maybe I can do a little more now.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And kind of see how you feel and see how you're recovering and everything else.
Yeah. I haven't noticed steady differences there, but
a little bit at a time.
Paying attention.
Got to focus on the other benefits.
I know. How about you? What do you wait? What's your kind of protein daily kit? What do you do?
So typically, I do very often have a smoothie in the morning. So I usually like first thing in the morning, I'll wake up, usually have like a yogurt or something before I do work out. And then after I work out, I'll often have a smoothie with, some fruit and getting some other fiber in there. Sometimes I throw oats in there. Mm-hmm. So I make a pretty dense smoothie in the morning because it's quick, it's easy, and it's convenient. Sometimes I'll have eggs, sometimes I'll have other things, but I do aim for, I should say I get around 40-ish grams of protein per meal, mm-hmm. And then have some snacks in there. So, I'm eating canned fish I love. So I do spread it out throughout the day. I'm very, very conscious of it because I'm certainly getting older as well. And I want to maintain muscle mass at the very least, even as I'm getting older, because most people aren't doing that. So I aim to get around 200-ish grams a day, give or take. I don't always hit that for sure. I weigh a little bit more than that. But I'm kind of in that ballpark.
Can you get too much protein? What happens? What happens then?
Yes, in the sense of then you're going to displace other calories. Mm-hmm. Is it safe? Yes. And data shows that if you are otherwise healthy kidneys, healthy liver, everything's fine. Adding more protein is perfectly safe. Mm-hmm. There was a concern for a long time or discussions for a long time that too much protein is going to stress your kidneys, for example. That doesn't seem to be the case at all. Research has shown very, very high levels of protein are safe. But like I said, where I'm then concerned is if you're eating that much protein, it is very filling, like we talked about. What are you not eating, right? There's other nutrients aside from protein that are critical, fiber and fruits and vegetables and grains and so on. So that's more of my concern more than the protein itself is unsafe. Mm-hmm.
And tell us about the other things that are good to add, or maybe you were talking a little bit about creatine and the mm-hmm. other supplements along with protein that you guys think a lot about. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Creatine is one that's really stood the test of time. Like when I was in high school, I remember hearing about it and I just started taking it then, and it seemed to be pretty new in the market. It had been around for a little bit before that. But at the time, it was more of like, again, reading fitness magazines, like, oh my gosh, creatine's the next big thing. Well, fast forward almost 30 years, and it's been amazing, the abundance of research on creatine, and not just for muscle mass, although it seems to be critical there, especially for the population we talked about, for the women who are aging, perimenopause, menopause. There's some really great data around that age group and creatine. Again, yes, for muscle mass. Also, there's some cool data looking at cognitive function and brain health right now, which I think is really cool. So there's so much. I mean, it has been shown time and time again to be safe. Admittedly, my kids take it. There's been some data in a younger population as well. I'm not saying everyone has to run out and start taking creatine. I've been very comfortable with the data that's out there, the safety data, and the benefits of creatine, adding some to the diet.
Okay, awesome. And what else? What else do you guys have that you can stick in there? And are these things that you add on, or do they come pre-mixed? Or
so you can add them on. They're called boosts, and you can get them and then add them into a particular product. Fiber is another one. I just mentioned fiber quickly earlier. That is, honestly, I think protein and fiber are the two nutrients that need to get more attention. Protein's gotten a lot of attention. Fiber hasn't gotten as much, but I think it's like the unsung hero of nutrition. Admittedly, you look at data, and we're eating half to a third of what we should be eating a day. And when we increase our fiber intake, it decreases our risk of heart disease and colon cancer and hypertension and so much else. So one thing I love, the particular that's oat fiber, is the boost from Gainful, which is a soluble source of fiber. It's 5 grams, which is a good amount. Put that into perspective, we should be eating about 25 to 35 grams a day. We're eating about 10 to 15 a day. So 5 grams in one scoop is a great way to add a great quality source of fiber to a smoothie, to oatmeal, to something along those lines. So fiber is definitely one that I think is great. And then Gainful also has a brand new greens product out there, which is almost like kind of filling in some of the nutritional gaps. I'm not saying it replaces fruits and vegetables, of course. It's a great way to add a little bit of extra nutrition, though. When we're trying to look at optimizing things, optimizing our nutrition, those are some ways to do it.
To continue talking about protein and some of its benefits, I know we talked a little bit about how it can impact, feelings of hunger, but how about its impact on metabolic health or heart health? How can it kind of help you there?
Great question, because most people think protein, they think muscle. And that is true. And really muscle, and I've heard this said, is kind of the organ of longevity, right? So the more muscle we have, again, don't think I'm going to, not fit into any of my clothes because I have so much muscle. That's not really a thing. For some people it might be, but it's hard to gain too much muscle. But we want to maintain as much as we can. Why does that help? Aside from just focusing on balance and bone strength, also helps with overall cardiovascular health, like you mentioned, heart health. When we have a more metabolically active organ like muscle, it can help control our glucose levels, which can play a role in, of course, diabetes and heart health. So that's one or another added benefit to protein that isn't often talked about. Again, we only think of muscle mass, but then that has added benefits to other organs and health and longevity as well.
The heart is a muscle also.
Exactly, right? So we need to think about that. It's not just our biceps and our whatever other visible muscle. Heart's pretty critical, I'd say.
Yes, no, it is. It is, and even just like your smooth muscle providing tone in there,
right?
It's important.
Yeah. And then looking at other like blood parameters, obviously like you guys measure, right? We're looking at how does it, like I said, glucose, but then when we have a more muscle mass, which is again super healthy, and less fat mass, that can play a role in other overall blood markers as well, and looking at improving our overall health outcomes.
Certainly, and certainly lowering your carbohydrate intake is certainly very helpful if you're in a pre-diabetic or a diabetic state. And if you're replacing those calories with protein, then you're also kind of combating muscle atrophy, which is another problem in diabetes, right?
Yeah, certainly. And then it becomes a big vicious cycle. Glucose is metabolized within muscle, among others, but mainly within muscle. So when I'm more active, when I have more muscle, that needs more fuel, which comes from glucose. So that's why, again, having that muscle mass as much as we can, again, within reason, is really, really important. And unfortunately, so many people, as we age, the muscle essentially just falls off. You kind of look like that melting candle, which, again, from an aesthetic standpoint, but then really from a health standpoint, becomes really dangerous. Frailty goes up as we age, and balance issues, and then we have potential falls. And then, of course, that becomes a whole nother challenge with
cascade.
A cascade, exactly. I mean, my mother-in-law recently, so she's in her early 80s, she was actually walking down the stairs and holding onto the railing, luckily, and her femur just snapped. And again, there's the huge muscle issue there, and muscle wasting as we age, and then of course bone strength goes down. And in her case, snapped her femur, which is her in that upper leg.
Yep.
And you see that it's so common among older people.
Of course, and I feel like a lot of times with older people, you can almost, I don't know, I've watched this with relatives. All of a sudden, one day you don't see them for a couple months, and then you see them, and then it's like a switch has been flipped.
Right.
And they go from maybe being like, looking very robust to looking very frail in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And that's sort of frightening. But
Right.
I know that even, I care for a family member with diabetes, and I talk to their physicians all the time, and they're constantly pushing Ensure, and just and like they're literally
Calories
just like
and
anything, just get whatever protein
Right.
you can get in there, however you want to, within reason,
Right.
given that this person is diabetic. But,
Yeah.
But actually, they went on Ozempic years ago and
Okay.
lost a lot of weight. But with that went the muscle mass.
Yeah, and that could certainly. So it's it's important with that, or with any you're making lifestyle changes that of course you're making sure you're exercising, and specifically resistance training is critical.
Training.
Exercise is amazing. Resistance training is a whole nother level,
Yes.
again, because then you're able to maintain muscle mass as much as you can, or gain it with the combination of nutrition. So I think what's interesting too and amazing is that you don't have to be young to start. I went to Penn State for my undergrad, and there was a researcher there at the time, and he did all research on older populations and gaining muscle. And I remember one study that the average age was they were late 80s, almost 90. Some of them were in their 90s. And you can gain a great amount of muscle mass. Of course, you want to make sure you're safe, but it doesn't mean it's never too late to start. And again, something's always better than nothing.
Yeah, dude. This is my new rabbit hole on Instagram, actually. It's like people in their 80s that have been like totally sedentary their whole lives, like just getting at it at the gym. And
I love
it's incredible. This
Yeah,
guy
it's
was
so
doing
great.
like these wild box jumps that
Oh my gosh.
seemed completely like out. I don't know. I'm like, I definitely could not do that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Pistol squats.
Right. That's amazing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
And I saw a similar video recently. It was a 100-year-old who just broke some world record for running,
Oh my
some
gosh.
sprinting thing. And it's
Was
so
it
cool
the
to
woman?
see. I've seen her, and this one was a man, but I know which one you're talking about as well.
I love it. I mean, like everything. Social media is a scary place,
Right?
And there are just
For
some
better
real
or for
gems
worse.
in there. I know. Awesome. So we talked a little bit about protein timing, but let's talk about protein lifetime timing. As you mentioned, as you age, you are going to lose muscle mass. But what are sort of the changing needs of somebody's protein requirements in the different life stages that they're in, and maybe how is that different between males and females?
Yeah, great question. When we think about as we age, our protein needs actually seem to go up as we get older, whether it's for absorption. Maybe that's not optimized, so we need to look at getting a higher amount so we can make sure we're getting in the right nutrients from the protein and other foods as well. The challenge is protein is filling, as we talked about. It's satiating, so it might be harder to increase your amounts as we age. But again, as we age, both men and women those needs seem to be a little bit higher than just even what I talked about earlier, which you might think, oh my gosh, that was high enough. Now we need even more than that. That is where then we have to look at different sources of protein. That's maybe where adding protein powder can make it easy to get a higher amount, because it's not going to be as satiating as a piece of chicken or steak or whatever else. Those are great as well. But when we're looking at adding quantity, how can we get quantity and quality without displacing other nutrients?
Right. And around what time in somebody's life does this really start to? Would you? And actually, I mean, you have teenage kids. What's a good recommended dose for teenagers?
Yeah.
Well, when they're in the growing phase.
They are in those growing phases. They're growing a lot more than any of us, right?
Really
so, and I admittedly I don't know the exact recommendation for teenagers, boys, girls, etc. But I would say it's not far off from what I said earlier. I often tell people to look at the palm of your hand and use that as a basic recommendation, and that's relative to your body size. So let's say if you use that, about a palm of your hand in protein is approximately a dose of where would provide a good amount per meal. Because that's for most people, that's around that 20 to 30 grams per meal. As we age, like I said, you might need a little bit more than that. Or if you're larger and have larger hands, you may need more than that as well. I used to work with a professional football team. Some of those guys certainly need higher amounts, bigger individuals, higher requirements. But for the teenage kid, I would kind of say that's a good ballpark, is looking at the palm of your hand. Again, that's about that 20-ish grams per meal, somewhere around there. And of course, you're more active, that plays a role into it, because you are growing as well.
And then when you get into like later on in life, around, is it really middle age when you want to start paying attention? Do you want to start maybe a little before then? Like, what happens in that kind of trail of health? Like, you're robust, and then you hit middle age, and you start to get worried. But then you're not hitting frailty for some time.
Hopefully,
hopefully.
Yeah.
But what does that sort of look like?
Yeah. Well,
are there different inflection points? You would say.
Mm-hmm. So at the ripe old age of about 30-ish. I don't know if that's not quite middle age, hopefully not, but that's when the data shows we start to lose muscle mass. It might actually even be a little bit before that. So we really need to start paying attention, across the lifespan. But at that age, I think that's really critical to make sure that we're getting those quantities in there combined with exercise. Now, 30 to 40, so we lose muscle mass every decade. It accelerates. After 30 to 40 is kind of the lowest loss. At 40 to 50, it starts to accelerate from there. Each decade we go on. Yeah, it gets real, exactly. So I think at that point of that 30-ish is when we really need to start looking at those numbers and making sure we're getting enough. As we get older, like I said, in the 40s, again, making sure it's a little bit higher, 50s, maybe even more so. And again, it's hard because protein's satiating, but that's why we look at trying to spread it out throughout the day, so fairly equal doses, and making sure that we're just very aware of, what do our snacks look like, because that's an easy way to get some smaller doses of protein, and then what are our meals made up of as well.
And how about after exercise?
In terms of timing?
In terms of timing. And maybe, I don't know, is there a difference between maybe a resistance training session and something that, like going out for a run or a bike ride or something? Yeah,
so when you exercise, you break down tissue, right? That's the natural part of exercise itself. Very healthy, very natural. Now, that said, it used to be thought that like right after exercise, I have to get my protein in immediately, that post-workout window. More recently, some research has shown that's maybe not as critical as once thought, that I need to get it in within like 30 minutes or whatever it might be. It also depends on what happened before the exercise session. Did I have any protein before?
Yeah.
Because, it's pulling from those proteins made up of amino acids. And then your exercise, you're breaking down that tissue, you're pulling from some of those amino acids. If there was availability beforehand, like did I have some kind of protein source, getting it right immediately after may not be as critical as once thought. Now, if you didn't, a lot of people exercise on an empty stomach, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but that's a different conversation. Then, maybe we need to get it in right away because I'm already pulling from nothing, and now I'm kind of starting in a hole. I need to dig even further just to get at to the top of that hole before I start building on top.
And then in the order of I don't know, what should somebody care about first? Should they care first about trying to get more, or making sure that the protein they get is appropriately timed?
Yeah. With protein, I say it's quality and quantity versus just... Now, I'm kind of backtracking on my answer there because a study just came out recently that looked at a pretty high dose, 100 grams of protein. It was a pretty effective strategy, actually, and in one meal was a very effective strategy for increasing what's called protein synthesis. Now, that's a good amount of protein, right? That's equivalent 100 grams. There's about 7 grams per ounce in animal protein. I can't do that math in my head right now, but that's a good amount. That's a huge steak, for example, that most people aren't going to eat regularly. So therefore, I'd say while that data showed that 100 grams was useful, it's more practical to think of how can I spread that out throughout the day. to get that same amount.
Were they doing shakes or
They,
something like that? I'm like, or were they just having 3 palms of
yeah,
steak?
no, I think, and don't quote me on this, I believe it was through a shake, or like through liquid protein versus a solid meal. Don't quote me on that one though. I'm forgetting the exact methods. It just came out pretty recently, that study.
I'll totally look
but I would say that, again, we want to look at the quality and the quantity, because quality matters as well. Like, I can get protein from rice, for example, not very much, but I can get it. It's going to be a higher quality combination of amino acids and nutrition and protein if I'm getting it from animal sources, or whey protein as a dairy source. So there's better ways to get it. So it's quality that we want to look at, and quantity.
And actually, I don't know, do you want to wade into the plant versus animal protein
debate? Yeah, I'd love to.
I am not an expert on this at all, but but where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so plant versus animal, I mean, both provide protein, right? And of course, there are tremendously healthy vegetarians or people even who follow vegan diets. It's definitely more difficult to get the right amount of protein and other nutrition as well. If you're eating plant-based proteins, most of them, aren't complete, meaning they have all the complete amino acids, whereas as animal-based proteins do. That said, if you have a combination, which again, we're fortunate, I say we as Americans as a whole, we're fortunate to have a variety of options that we do get to choose from. So if we're eating enough variety in the diet, even as a plant-based diet, you can get enough protein. You do have to make a very conscious effort, though, to do so, because it's a lot easier to eat a piece of chicken or steak or fish or something like that.
The protein to calorie ratio is...
And protein to calorie ratio is very different. So to get that same quantity in beans and rice, for example, which is a great meal, it's a lot more calorie dense. So it does take a little bit of effort. Is it possible? Absolutely. And there's also great plant protein supplements that you can take as well to also make that easier to get that higher level of protein if that's your personal choice. But if you're choosing from a protein standpoint, animal protein it's going to be a little bit easier to get that high quality protein per meal, per food, etc.
And you have 2 options at Gainful. You might have more than 2 options, actually, but I know you have whey.
There's whey, and there are plant-based, which is a combination of different plant proteins, because you want to get that complete amino acid profile. So very often you have to combine different protein sources to do that.
And actually, this is a question I had. How does your product differ from, let's say, something you might buy at Walgreens? Where I know that you're striving for some real perfection with what you have. So.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I love is it's a quality protein sources. I'm not saying that other brands aren't quality, but 2, I love that it's unique that they're unflavored, because then you can add flavoring packets, or if you don't want to, you can flavor it with fruit or something else in there. So it comes unflavored, high quality protein within the product itself, and then you can kind of make what you want with it, or just use it in baking or use it in other applications as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Again, the personalization is the key.
Yep. Very fair. Just we believe in that at InsideTracker. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about how protein can influence, especially women's metabolic health at a certain age, right? So do you have a lot of customers who are women of this age who are looking to maybe consume more
protein? Yeah. That's certainly a growing customer base for sure. People, I think there's more awareness around it.
There is, fortunately.
And that said, maybe it's, my wife is in that age group right now, so I'm now hearing a lot more about it through her friends, through the ads I get from talking to her about it. Being targeted to now me. So, from a research standpoint, certainly I could, talk about what are the protein needs for that age group. Obviously, from a personal standpoint, it's not, I'm not going through that myself, but, yes, as we age, again, women in particular, going through perimenopause and menopause, that is a different level of, you're going to potentially lose muscle mass. Your hormones are going to shift. Estrogen is going to decrease, which then independently can play a role in bone health and bone strength and muscle health, which is why we need to make sure we're doing what we can to at least give our muscles that nutrition they need. and work as hard as we can through exercise to try to maintain as much as we can, because when hormone shifts happen, our body is challenged to hold on to that muscle as much as it can.
Yep.
So it's certainly a critical nutrient at that age for women going through that transition of perimenopause and menopause and so on. And then really as men age as well, again, not through the same menopause, but as we age, it's more likely that we're going to start to lose muscle mass too.
Absolutely. And I know one of the things that we do a lot of at InsideTracker, looking at the data set that we have on our population. So we have blood data from nearly 100,000 people, right? And we analyze this entirely anonymously and blindly, but we can look at the relationship between different blood biomarkers and age. So we can see some of these inflection points, and actually one of the major inflection points we do see in both men and women is right around middle age. All of the biomarkers that we have in InnerAge 2.0, all of them are either positively or negatively correlated with age. So we can just say that they are, essentially longevity biomarkers and that they correlate with age. Mm-hmm. They have that characteristic. But right around middle age, you'll see actually for heart health, things like LDL and triglycerides, they tend to actually start rising up earlier in women than in men. But in men, it's the other way around. They start rising earlier in men than women. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, we see this big cliff around mid-50s for men where it drops. And I think that's because everybody's going on a statin.
Oh, maybe.
But that definitely seems to be a very critical time to, maybe find out what's happening inside your body.
Right.
Things are moving and shaking, and it's also a good period of time, especially for women. And I am a woman of of this age too. Is like, you've worked really hard. You might have worked really hard at your career at work. You might have built a home and a family. Your kids could be pawing at you every 5 minutes for stuff, and all of a sudden, that was your 30s, and then your 40s happened, and you have to stop and take a breath and try to do whatever you can to take care of yourself, right? It goes for women and men,
yeah.
Right? Especially the kids that are older, they're a little more independent. You don't have to literally feed them or cut their food anymore, and I don't know. It's if people can, in whatever way they can, just stop, pause, and say what is the thing that I need to do for myself. One of the things for myself was actually, Renee, you need to sleep better and consume more protein.
Right.
I know this, and it's easy for me to know this because I work at InsideTracker. Fortunately, I have access to a lot of smart, RDs and people
data,
like you who know a lot. But
yeah, no, my wife calls that the kind of the midlife collision, right? Is everything you mentioned with the maybe younger kids, career, you've built that up, and now you're into that 40s, maybe early 50s, and maybe aging parents on the other side. So you need to look at, I have taken care of everyone but me.
Yeah.
Or even if you have taken care of you, then all of a sudden, you're still, maybe some changes are starting to accelerate.
Yeah.
And that's why something like InsideTracker is so important to. Physically, you may or may not be able to see changes, but internally, you can't see those unless you get measured, right?
Absolutely.
Unless you figure out then you have that data I really need to make change.
Yeah.
Again, physically, you might be able to see something as well, but that's why it's so important to make, the conversation we're having is how do we then transition to start to really take care of ourselves, the little things we're talking about. And it's not overhauling your entire life.
Yeah.
Like you said, maybe people start taking statins in their mid-50s or so on, or maybe they're having a whole bunch of behavior change to, manage their own health as much as they can through the resistance training, through adequate protein, through fiber, all the other nutrition pieces, and exercise, and hopefully managing their sleep and all those other aspects of well-being.
Yes, I feel like now that the kids are older, there's just slightly more time. There's just a little bit more room since they have independence.
Right.
But I think you made a really good point too, where you kind of hit this midlife point, and I always think of it as it's like your middle management in life, where, you have the people, the more junior folks that you are looking after, and then all of a sudden, you've got management, your parents,
Right.
and they really need you too, or other family members. It doesn't have to be your parents, but
Right.
you don't realize that part of your job is going to be caregiving. Like nobody's really baking that. Nobody's thinking about that when they're
Right.
I mean, maybe some folks have to think about it when they're a little bit younger, unfortunately, because they're in a situation. But it always creeps up on you.
Absolutely.
A little bit, I feel like. But it's a lot. It's a lot of work, and it's like good, wonderful, satisfying work. And it's actually very funny. The person that I am a caretaker for, my uncle, I am yelling at him all the time to eat more protein. It's a constant. I'm not yelling at him,
Right? But
really, actually, what I'm trying to say is like in your situation, a little can go a long way.
Right.
So just do like a little bit more today than you did yesterday,
Yeah.
or this week than last week, and
absolutely. And that's where almost like I know, like my dad's in the same situation where he has Alzheimer's, and so my mom is his full-time caretaker, but it's always like he does eat, fortunately, very, very well when she makes it, but it's also like sprinkling protein powder on this to add more because he doesn't exercise anymore.
Yeah.
So trying to at least maintain as much as he can. And it's literally a lot of it is adding protein powder to his other foods that he would already eat, just to make sure he's getting those adequate amounts.
Yeah, hiding the carrots.
Yeah, no, totally.
Like,
100%.
Yep, they are hidden in the pasta sauce.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Are there any myths about protein that are out there that you would love to debunk?
Yeah, I think one of them is actually that too much protein. You asked this earlier, but it is dangerous. I'm going to start overtaxing my kidneys, and the reason is because when protein's used, metabolized, you then excrete through your urine and kidneys and urine the excess. So people, the thought was then, oh my gosh, that's stressing them out. And it is perfectly safe and healthy if you are otherwise healthy individual to add more protein to your diet. That's one of the biggest myths. Another big piece is protein. A lot of times people immediately think of steak, for example, which can be great if you choose it and has tons of nutrition. There's other sources as well, and protein can be very lean sources of protein that you can choose too. It doesn't have to be all really, really high fat meats or other foods. Yes, animal protein like steak, and there's very, very lean cuts. Also chicken and turkey and pork and fish. And then there's also non-animal sources. There's dairy. If you choose dairy, great. And there's lower fat dairies. There's also there's tofu, and there's nuts, which have a little bit. No, they're not the best source, but they're a great source of nutrition. So it's this big. We want to look at a variety of sources because it's not. Yes, protein is critical, but they also provide all this other nutrition as well. So the more variety we can have, is the key for overall well-being and health.
The whole grain bread that I use has 6
has
grams
protein.
a slice.
Yeah,
like it's actually.
Totally.
Surprisingly
right.
good. So
yeah.
I'm like, oh, there's 12 right there.
There's that. And then maybe you have, it could be like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich again, and a glass of milk. Right there, you have 20, 25 grams of protein, depending on the higher protein milk even.
Yeah.
So
there's higher protein milk? I did not know that.
Yeah, it's called ultra processed. So they actually concentrate out, they remove the lactose, which is naturally occurring in sugar, in dairy, and that increases the protein quantity. So it's almost double the amount of protein than a traditional cup of dairy.
Where do they sell this?
The regular grocery store.
I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah, there's one primary brand that sells that. There's been some others out there, but it's ultra processed milk. And
is that good for the folks who are lactose intolerant? Then,
yep, because it's lactose free.
I mean, I'm curious. I buy lactose free milk for my kids, but I didn't notice whether it had more protein in it than standard milk or not.
It's about 13 grams per cup, whereas regular milk has about 8 grams per cup.
No, this has about 8 grams. The brand, whatever brand.
Yeah.
Have.
So
interesting.
Yeah, and I think there are a few brands. There's one main brand of that kind of popularized that. It's just regular dairy, but it's just that ultra processed. And then again, there of course yogurt and cottage cheese, and there are options. As we talked about earlier, we just need to be aware of them and make that conscious effort to choose them, because they're not usually the go-to options, right? So but there's even cereal that has some protein in it, and there are choices: cheese sticks, jerky. There are lots of things that we can choose. Again, we just have to be conscious about it.
All right, so Gainful and InsideTracker actually have a lot in common.
Yes.
I would say first and foremost is our unwavering commitment to personalization. We talked a little bit about how you can how Gainful personalizes your options. Obviously, InsideTracker, we take lots of measurements and from that kind of figure out where you are and then provide personalized lifestyle prescriptions. Really, that's the way that I think about them. Is instead of being written a script for a drug, you're written a script for diet changes, exercise, recovery, or supplements, if that makes sense. And one of the supplements we do recommend for some folks, of course, is supplementing with extant protein, whether it's whey protein or whether it is a vegetarian source of protein. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Like I'd say our two companies are definitely sharing mind space here for that.
Yeah, very aligned. And then that personalization thing is key. And it's unique, I think, for both aspects, right? That personalization is important with your supplement to see what you need, what you may need, and what may help. Same thing with blood markers to get that. Obviously, everyone is unique, right? So you can get that same personalization. And when we talk about, protein, when we talk about one of the foundations for Gainful, how does that even help some of these blood markers? We start to look at if we add more protein in the diet and it displaces some other nutrition, right? Because calories matter as a whole, but where are those calories coming from? Well, then maybe that shifts some body weight changes. Independent of that, we may then look at how that may transition to helping with blood markers. So I have a body weight shift, whether it's fat loss and or muscle gain. That may play a role in things like my triglycerides may go down. Yep. My HDL may go up. My LDL, other blood markers may go down as well. So it's improving my cardiovascular health by adding more protein, again, displacing some other nutrition that wasn't the best choice, higher sugar, higher fat items maybe. So it's, again, shifting those overall calories by making quality choices that are important.
Exactly. And then being able to see the change in those biomarkers, or at least try it and see. So, InsideTracker does recommend it for folks with elevated LDL, triglycerides, and total cholesterol, and lower creatine kinase. So if if that looks like your blood biomarker profile, then, this is a recommendation for you. And, what we really encourage people to do, and whether you do it with InsideTracker or not, it doesn't really matter. And I think we were talking about this before too. It's amazing to have a baseline, right? We talked actually a lot about what happens in middle age, maybe 40 and beyond.
Right.
But actually what I think would be, what I really wish that I had was as comprehensive of a baseline in my 30s and 20s.
Yeah.
And I have some data from, I wasn't really wearing a wearable then. That's maybe not true. I think I had a Fitbit in my 30s, but, I wasn't having as comprehensive of a blood panel done. But I did always have my LDL measured, ever since my 20s, because it was always borderline high, even when I was very young. And so I, would ask doctors to keep track of it.
Right.
But it really was that measurement of LDL over time that allowed me to make decisions about what I was going to do about it. And I did try many different types of dietary interventions, but sometimes you're bumping up against genetics. But I think, in that case, if you are maybe looking to improve your heart health category, it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you won't know unless you get the blood work done.
Yeah.
Right? You can't see your heart.
Yes,
right?
That's true.
Aside from just simply seeing what you see in the mirror, that's all you can see is the external picture, which, does help. But again, you could be physically the healthiest looking person in the world, but genetically, maybe you have high lipids passed down from a parent or parents, or, that's me. My mom has high triglycerides, way, way off the charts. Like they were 5,000 when she was pregnant with me. They should be under 150. So genetically, I have that potential.
It's just there. Yeah.
It's just there. But I wouldn't know unless I got my blood work done, right? So that's why it's
absolutely
so critical.
There's always, I mean, it's always weird to find out the surprises.
Right. Right.
You're glad and not glad, but kind of glad at the same time.
Absolutely. So, yeah. You don't want those surprises too late.
No,
right?
You don't want them too late. But I don't know. I really did wish that I had more of a comprehensive picture. Mm-hmm. I wish I knew then what I do now.
Right. But
always way. But it's never too late.
Exactly. The only way is to start.
No, absolutely. Best time to plant a tree. You
right.
know?
100%.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, wonderful.
I know.
It's been good.
Thank you so much for coming here.
Of course.
And telling us all of this great information about protein. I love to talk about protein.
I was going to say, I love talking protein, nutrition, so it's good to be here with you.
Amazing. Thanks.